What's up guys, JM here. Before we get into things, please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future chapter summaries. Chapter 4 concludes with the Emilia camp arriving in Pristella. Chapter 5 picks up from where we left off, as Subaru looks at the towering walls surrounding the exterior of the city, mentioning that the city looks exactly like the prison he expected it to be. Beatrice adds that it wasn't the sightseeing spot that Joshua said it was, looking more depressing than relaxing. Subaru agrees with his contracted spirit, then mentions that at least the bridge and gates are kinda cool. While their carriage is traveling across the Tigressy Bridge, which leads to the front gates of Pristella, Subaru looks over the horizon and is greeted by sunlight glinting on the water, similar to an ocean, if such things were to exist in this landlocked world. Beatrice brings up how Pristella is built upon a lake, then describes the land inside the walls to be so flat that it forms a basin in the center, and if you envision the city as an old trap, you can expect the center to easily flood. Subaru, remembering how Emilia mentioned that Pristella might have been built to trap a powerful mob beast, asks Beatrice if that was true. Beatrice, who was seeing the city for the first time, doesn't know but believes it to be true. Beatrice notices something patting her head, then asks, "Why are you stroking Betty's head, I suppose?" Subaru, smiling, tells her that he wants to spend all the time he can patting her. Beatrice was not pleased by his response, but didn't swat Subaru's hand as they continued to cross the bridge. Beatrice is still a tsundere at heart, I see. While crossing the bridge, Subaru noticed there was no signs of litter or waste on the bridge. Otto agrees, as Pristella is known to be very strict on littering to preserve its landscape, and that there is a border check once they enter the gates. Subaru begins muttering to himself. Otto instantly warns him to not be weirdly assertive and reject the binding paperwork he will have to sign at the border. Subaru is confused when Otto mentions paperwork. Emilia chimes in, mentioning that in the capital of Lagunica, you're exempt from it if you have a carriage on your crest. However, Pristella requires everyone to fill out paperwork just to enter the city. Subaru thinks of the paperwork in border as a passport and customs check back in Japan. He's still confused by binding paperwork though. He asks Emilia and Otto for more information. Is it written on paper that makes you guias yourself, like it does something to your OD once you sign, and the second you break the terms your gate stops working or something? No, Subaru, guias does not exist in this world, otherwise GG's if the person that has it uses it to control Reinhardt. Emilia, baffled by Subaru's question, tells him that the paperwork wouldn't have anything as scary as that. Rather, it's just an agreement that you won't do anything bad and have your conscience keep a close eye on you. Subaru laughs and says, "We'd have world peace if everyone were as strict on themselves as you, Emilia." Otto describes the paperwork further. There are specific laws in Pristella that must be upheld, and that the paperwork will mention what they are, then tells everyone to make sure they actually read it. Garfield, not the brightest one in the group, tells Otto to read and tell everyone the rules on their behalf. Otto, not pleased with Garfield's laziness, fires back, telling him that he will never mature with that attitude. Garfield ignores Otto's warning as usual and turns to Subaru for approval. Subaru nods at him. Beatrice, shaking her head, calls Subaru and Garfield impossible children to manage. Otto couldn't have agreed more with her. Shortly after, the Emilia faction arrived at the front gates of Pristella. They went through border inspection, which was completed with no hiccups. Emilia and Otto had correctly predicted the paperwork's terms, containing the city's rules and agreeing to follow them. The terms were very simple and practically impossible to violate for Subaru and the others. They just had to read the terms, sign their name, and get an officer's approval. The officers panicked a little when Emilia introduced herself, but they let her through. Subaru mentions that it must be big news having two of the royal candidates in one place. Emilia tells him that there wasn't too much of a fuss, so Anastasia or someone from her faction probably let them know in advance. For some reason, Garfield and Otto's border inspections were taking much longer than expected. They probably caught Otto trying to smuggle alcohol in. He's gone from a regular merchant to a black market dealer. Eventually, Otto and Garfield's inspections end and they walk out. Subaru asks them what took them so long. Otto, annoyed, tells Subaru that Garfield had held them up and that he had been telling him to practice his writing so many times. Subaru looks at Garfield and asks him if he can't write. Garfield, trying to defend himself, tells Subaru he can write, just that it isn't perfect, which means his handwriting was so trash it was like trying to understand rocket science. Subaru agrees with Otto that Garfield should study to prevent this from happening again. He mentions that he knows Garfield writes letters to Luz and that they should be legible. Garfield chuckles and says that he and Granny go way back, so she can read anything he writes, even if it's with his left hand. Garfield, for all that's good in the world, please do not write with your left hand. Subaru sighs as he knows that Garfield doesn't plan on improving at all. We learn that Luz is not living in the Roswell mansion with Garfield and the others. Instead, Luz and her 24 clones have been assigned to oversee several forests in Roswell's domain. Emilia and Garfield still have the ability to command the clones, and their orders can reach them from a long distance. As a result of this, the Emilia faction are trying to use the clones as middlemen for communicating orders. Subaru had proposed this idea at first. While Garfield was opposed at first, he agrees with it now. Subaru doesn't want to leave the clones with no purpose, as he feels guilty for letting them die in a previous loop. While Subaru was lost in thought, Emilia calls to him as the bag check for the carriage is done and they are ready to go. Subaru smiles back and then grabs Petrash's reins. She notices Subaru's unease and rubs her snout against him to comfort him. Subaru thanks her and strokes her scales, then tugs on the reins so they can enter Pristella. Subaru and the others are greeted by a beautiful sight. It was how Subaru first envisioned Pristella to be, similar to Venice back in his old world. There were several rows of stone buildings, being the most western architecture Subaru has seen in this world. There are several large canals running through the town and gondolas paddling on them. Subaru and the rest of the Emilia faction are in awe at the city. The guards at the gate smile back at them, proud of their city. Garfield, amazed at the sight, mentions that Otto wasn't lying and continues to enjoy the view. Since Otto is a merchant, he was overcome with emotions being able to visit the hometown of the god of merchants, Hoshin. Hearing Otto mention Hoshin reminds Subaru of Hoshin's name, Hoshin of the Waste. He asks Otto if Hoshin was the one merchant guy from ages ago who made riches out of a burnt wasteland. Otto tells Subaru he's mostly right, but instead of a burnt wasteland, it was just the untamed lands of Kararagi. Subaru notices that Otto's eyes are filled with passion as he tells the story of Hoshin. Subaru then mentions that Anastasia calls herself Hoshin after him. Otto believes it's very bold for Anastasia to do that, but she's achieved enough already to warrant the name. Subaru, having enough of the view, strokes Beatrice's hair and tugs on Emilia's sleeve to get their attention. He mentions that Anastasia's waiting for them at the Sea Sylph Lodge, and while he doesn't know where it is, he knows it's not cheap. Emilia agrees with him and she thinks that Otto investigated more into the area. Otto nods and gets on the driver's platform. He tells them that he has the route mapped out and will take them to the lodge. Otto also mentions that they won't be able to rush as boats have higher priority than carriages here. The group continue their journey to the lodge, although their pacing is quite slow. Meanwhile, Subaru and the others continue seeing what Pristella has to offer. Subaru points out how there really aren't many carriages in the town. Emilia, agreeing with him, mentions how the roads that were wide enough for carriages aren't straight as the canals have higher priority than the streets. Subaru looks at the canals and sees the gondolas passing by. Seeing them, he asks if boats have any blessings like how carriages have the windbreaker blessing. Emilia isn't sure, then Beatrice chimes in, mentioning that water dragons have blessings. Subaru's intrigued and mentions that he wouldn't mind seeing one, but only one. Beatrice says that there's bound to be some in the city. Subaru then remembers that Beatrice has a dislike towards animals for some reason, not just towards Petrash. Beatrice, looking out the window, calls Subaru over that it's his chance to see something. Subaru walks over and is immediately taken aback. He's greeted by a long, blue snake-like figure staring back at him. It was none other than a water dragon. Seeing the dragon's body, Subaru's tempted to call it Shenron. According to Subaru, the water dragon came off as unfriendly. Beatrice, agreeing with him, mentions that water dragons are much harder to tame compared to earth dragons like Petrash. Subaru reminisces about how he bonded with Petrash the moment they met. She was originally a part of Krush's faction, but Petrash grew extremely attached to him since the battle against the white whale. The water dragon looks at Subaru and screeches at him. Subaru, offended as he thinks the dragon is insulting him, roars back at the dragon. Petrash, who is very protective of Subaru, roars at the water dragon, scaring it instantly. Otto, annoyed at Subaru's shenanigans, scolds him by telling him to stop encouraging Petrash to do weird things and cause a scene. While their carriage was crossing another bridge, Subaru can't help but mention that the city seems to be divided into four by the canals. Emilia, agreeing with him, tells Subaru that the giant waterways divide the city into four districts: District 1, District 2, District 3, and District 4. Subaru, not impressed by the names of the districts, mentions that they're not creative at all. Garfield seconds this, and Beatrice basically tells the two of them, "I don't see who asked." Emilia informs the group that the Sea Sylph Lodge is in District 1. Shortly after, they arrive at the lodge. Otto, not wanting any trouble, walks into the carriage and tells everyone to wait by the entrance. Subaru, not pleased by this, asks Otto if it's really bad for them to go in first. I wonder why. It's not like when Otto let you and Emilia handle things at the meeting, things didn't end horribly. Otto doesn't want them to encounter Anastasia while he's gone and get hooked by her. Subaru not happy with Otto's lack of trust, but he understands why. Trying to kill time, Subaru and the others begin looking at their surroundings. Emilia, looking at the lodge, mentions it looks so funny as she's never seen one like it before. Subaru turns around and his jaw drops. The lodge looks exactly like a ryokan from Japan. It looks completely out of place in this western city. Look at the surprise on you. Was a good choice I made handpicking this hotel, says a calm, cheerful voice. Subaru turned towards the direction of the voice. Standing in front of him was none other than Anastasia. Mission failed. I'm sorry, Otto. GG's, my guy. Anastasia, wanting to catch up and show hospitality, invites the group inside to relax and chat. And that sums up Chapter 5 of Arc 5. This was a pretty short chapter, but we got to explore Pristella and learn more about it since this is the main stage for Arc 5. We got more bantering and character interactions from the Emilia camp, which is always welcome. Better enjoy it while we can. We know that eventually shit will hit the fan. I'm glad we're getting callbacks to the previous chapters, like how Subaru mentioned back in Chapter 3 that Pristella sounds like Venice, and it ended up coming true. It's great attention to detail and rewards the reader for paying attention. Speaking of callbacks, we learned about what the Ryuzu clones have been up to. I'm so glad that Tappei doesn't forget characters and they all play a part in the story. I hope to see them again in the future arcs, especially the Echidna one. We were left on the cliffhanger with Anastasia meeting the group before Otto could come back. There's no way her showing up wasn't intentional. If Joshua is worth his salt, he would have certainly told Anastasia that Otto is the brains of the group. She's got Emilia and the others right where she wants them, away from their strategist, and they can't deny her invitation to go inside, as that would be seen as rude. Otto is probably going to have a heart attack. I wonder what Anastasia's plan and thought process is right now, but we'll have to wait until the next chapter to find out. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Normally I would be covering comments from the last video. However, I wanted to ask you guys if you would like to see individual chapter summaries continue, or if you would prefer I did large one video summaries for each arc until arc 7 and then switch back to individual chapter summaries. With that being said, please let me know what you would like to see in the comments section. Thank you for watching and I hope you have a great day.